Ladies and gentlemen, open banking pioneers, hello and a big warm welcome. Thank you very much for joining us around our campfire. Now today we start a very important conversation around late payments for SMEs and how open banking can play an important part in addressing this problem. Now we always focus on the use case. You tell us that's what you want to hear. So we look at how fintech innovation, in this case, Bankify, can help banks better serve their business customers. So we're joined by the MD of the Co-op Bank, Catherine. So we'll be hearing more around how banks and fintechs collaborate. Now there's that word that we like. How banks and fintechs collaborate to solve a huge issue for our economy and our society. So let me start by asking you all a question. Why should we care about late payments to SMEs? Why put on this campfire? Now, when I actually got to look at the stats, I actually got very, very dizzy deciding which ones we should share. So I'd like to first of all thank Gio, our head of research and blog content, and also our friends at GovCo, who are standing up projects in this area. So they have helped with the stats that I'm going to run through, just to give you some context. So SMEs, now they account for 99.9% of the business population, which is circa 5.5 million are active. Now, we can look at later in this campfire about how we define an SME. And it's not a homogeneous mass. I understand that, but whatever that number is, it's colossal, okay? But let's have a look at some more stats. SMEs account for 3/5 of the employment and around half of the turnover in the UK private sector. All of a sudden, it's becoming important, yeah? Understandably, SMEs are often referred to as the backbone of the UK economy. With an employment total of over 16.8 million people, that's 61% of the total working population, and contributing an estimated whopping £2.3 trillion. Now, and this is something I learned, that 2.6 million of the private sectors are all registered for VAT and PAYE, so clearly contributing very actively to our economy in that area as well. Many of you listening may already know this stat. It's a sad one, but 80% of small businesses fail in the first 18 months, citing cash and cash flow in particular as an issue. Late payments contribute to, I'm going to have to read this number out, 23.4 billion pounds per year. That's the total cost, the impact and the cost of late payments to our economy. So all of a sudden, to answer that rhetorical question, why should we care? Hopefully you're getting on my page. So we'll be looking at bounce back loans, I'm sure, during this debate, and whether debt is the answer. And I'm not here to answer that. I'm just here to position it. Now, one fact that I do want to close on, and I at the top of this campfire, I talked about the impact on our economy and the impact on society. 46% of SMEs say that they have mental health issues due to sleepless nights over cash due to late payments. So I would say, however you want to slice and dice these numbers, however you want to look at them, they are colossal, they have an impact, they do affect us all. And as we come out of the pandemic and work towards a healthy recovery, I would argue that why should we care about late payments? Because it affects us all. That's why. Now, I can assure you, you are in for a fascinating and, as always, provocative conversation. And today it's going to be very educational as well. I am joined by Liz Barkley, the Small Businesses Commissioner, an absolute inspiration. You're in for a masterclass there. Catherine Douglas, the MD of for SME from the Cooperative Bank, renowned for being an ethical bank and again leading the way in this field. Mark Hartley, founder and chief exec of Bankify. Big shout out, Mark, for working with us for this campfire, and also congratulations to you and your team for your latest round of funding. Well done, Team Bankify. Also, just to have real stakeholder engagement, we have Robert Downs from the Small Business Federation and Anne Lamberbin, who is an SME. So really they're at the coalface to share her experiences. So without further ado, and I deliberately have kept my opening very short because I want to give everybody space to have this debate around the campfire. I am delighted to pass the mic to David Bannister. He's the chief analyst of Blur, and he's also a journalist. And he will be writing a blog so we can continue this conversation post-campfire. So, David, without further ado, over to you.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much, Helen. That was a pretty scary set of numbers you were giving us there. And I'm pretty sure we're going to hear some even scarier ones as we go through the process. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing myself or anything like that. As Helen said, I'm a journalist, originally a journalist. I've spent 40 years writing about technology and banking, and the last 5 specifically looking at business banking internationally, both small businesses and large corporates who are equally unhappy with their banks, by the way. We've got today, we've got 3 people. We will have, I hope. We've currently lost one because one of the other problems that small businesses face is the very poor internet connectivity in this country. So I'm going to turn first to Robert from the Small Business Federation. Robert, I really want to pick up on some of those statistics that Helen was talking about in terms of the scary big numbers there. The billions of things in late payments. You're representing a group of people. Is that their biggest problem, the late payments, or is this part of a wider issue?
It's the Federation of Small Businesses, actually. But, yes, it is. It's a huge problem for our members and for the wider small business community. It's a killer problem, and I'm not exaggerating there either. We did some research a couple of years ago, Time to Act piece of research with small firms, and we reckon that 50,000 businesses fail every year because of late payment. It's a serious headache for them, and it will put some out of business. The pandemic has undoubtedly made the situation a whole lot worse. Cash flow has dried up during the pandemic. We saw that early on, and we had the bounce back loans. Businesses desperate to get some cash flow through the business. We saw big businesses just not paying in some cases. So yeah, it will cripple businesses. It will put some out of business, but paying right can do so much for the economy as well. Paying on time, we believe, would put 2.5% on small business profit margins in a year. That frees up money for them to reinvest in the business, for training, for all sorts of things, taking on more staff. So there's a reason for getting it right. And there's lots of good reasons, that businesses shouldn't do it and should try and sharpen up the payment practices. It kills businesses.
So currently, can I ask what the kind of recourses there are? I mean, we're looking at this in a banking context, but clearly it's an issue between businesses as well. I mean, is this something that basically you're going to have to go to court to get your money, or walk away? Is that the sort of situation for most people?
I think the problem we have is that the redress these days just isn't good enough, I suppose. What we do find is that our members who are working with larger businesses, they don't really want to sort of push it. They're not paid in 30 days, they're not paid in 60 days. They don't want to push it for fear of losing a big customer. They can take it down the legal route, but then will they work with those people again? Probably not. So it's the legal option is sort of the last course of action, really. But then there is the Small Business Commissioner. They can get that organisation involved, and I think we'll be hearing from Liz shortly. But again, it's sort of pressing the nuclear button that a little bit, and it's what we encourage our members to do is to have best practice, credit management. Make sure that you're in charge of your invoices. You make sure you're on top of the, of how you contact businesses. We do offer that kind of training for our members to make sure that they're doing their very best. But at the end of the day, if a business decides they're not going to pay you on time, then that's it starts with them, and then it becomes a big problem for the down the supply chain, and it does tend to wash down the supply chain as well. And we know it's not just a private sector thing either. We see this, in the public sector and government contracts. Tier 1 suppliers, they may be paying on time, but then they're tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. What checks are being made to make sure they're paying on time, and it tends to cascade down them, and then we see big problems with big businesses that have gone out of business in the past. Some big construction companies. And it always ends, further down the line. It runs downhill and affects lots of businesses.
Okay, well, we've got back on the line. We had some difficulties earlier on. We've got Anne Lamblin, who's at the very small end of the small business thing. Anne, I'm glad you're with us at last. You've heard Robert there talking about the scale of the problem. I wanted to turn to you first originally to say, let's get the voice of the small business here. How does it affect you? Tell us what the actual experience is from your business point of view. What hurts most?
Late payments and non-payments altogether, to be perfectly honest. It's varying effect really in terms of the impact it's going to have. We've had 5 years ago, we've had up to about £50,000 that was either late or had to be erased. So this hurts tremendously. But if we just concentrate on the late payments, we have to bear in mind that, as Robert was saying, it's a snowball effect that comes from a certain level and then does go down the chain, unfortunately. When we deal a business to business, we don't sell to customers, or extremely rarely. And we are lucky enough to not have all of our businesses that we deal with who are within a chain. So it is very often their decision to withhold payment. One of the new things that we've unfortunately seen is not just late payments. They are actually being very good pupils in the fact that they pay their invoice on time, but they don't allow us to issue the invoice on time, and they withhold the purchase order number. So we can't send an invoice. And as Robert was saying, they are big clients. We don't want to push too much for fear of losing the client. So it's a bit of a battle of reason, really. I probably need to highlight one positive, because there's not so many of them, that has come out of the pandemic, is that late payments, and I know you're probably going to touch on the subject in a minute, but it's probably going to be differentiated a lot more between sectors now. We are in the food and drinks sector, and we supply chefs to the industry, and because there is such a shortage at the moment, due to everyone having gone to do other things during the pandemic, because every single restaurant and food outlet was closed, or nearly. The one positive thing is that when clients finally get a chef in the kitchen, they try to keep them. And in order to keep them, they need to make sure they pay us. So in that respect, for the sector, I think at the moment we're seeing a good thing happening. If everyone would keep to it, it would be perfect.
So that's a very positive note. I just want to pick up on one thing you said in there, that the people, it's not just people are being late because they've got cash flow problems. They're actually deliberately slowing down the payments because they're in a position of power over you. Yeah, absolutely. So that's not a very nice thing to be doing. Okay, the person we probably ought to turn to see how we can deal with that is Liz Barkley, who's the Small Business Commissioner, Liz, and a campaigner in this area for many years as well. Liz, have you can't approve of people deliberately making payments later. Are you going to go? How are you going to deal with that?
I'm going to try to work with people in order to get a better ultimate response and to change the culture. But it's quite interesting. I was at the Scottish Business Network meeting last night, and I was asked by one of the audience there, are you seeing firms deliberately withholding payment? And the answer has to be yes, but also it is getting better too. And it's partly getting better because what Anne just described, she needs to get paid for the chef because otherwise the restaurant doesn't get to keep the chef. And that's the same in a lot of areas in the supply chain at the moment. We're seeing at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of bigger firms that did have fairly poor payment practices, speeding up the speed with which they paid their small businesses because the penny dropped. You know, that light bulb moment when you realize if that supplier is not there, then you don't have anything on the shelf to sell to your customers. But also, if that supplier goes bust and you've got to go and look for another one, that's an expensive pursuit as well. You know, you're using up a lot of resources on that. So I think there is a shift. The bigger businesses are really looking to how they can pay the small businesses better. A lot of them are saying it's really hard to identify small businesses, and that I don't have as much sympathy with, perhaps, as you know, others might do. Because I think it is possible. You just have to put the time and resource behind that. There are all sorts of ways of doing that, identifying your small businesses. And honestly, if you can't put that time and effort in, what about just paying all of your small and medium-sized enterprises within 30 days? But, you know, what Robert said right at the beginning was this is a killer problem. And what he means by that is it's a killer problem because a small business, and the smaller that business, the more that 500 quid matters. So if there's 500 quid outstanding on an invoice, that can make a difference between you going bust or not. And one case that springs to mind is the woman who actually faced the fact that she didn't have money to pay her children, to feed her children over the weekend, and finally got in touch with the Small Business Commissioner's office because we can help. But she didn't want to push that nuclear button. And we've heard Robert describe that. We want to keep the business relationship, if at all possible. But she did push that nuclear button. And luckily, she came to us before the close of play on Friday. And we managed to get that money into her account so that she could feed her children that afternoon. But the person on the other end of that contract was horrified, absolutely horrified, because that payment department had never thought about it in that light. So we really have to get the messages across to the bigger businesses. These are small businesses, and this is the killer that you could be doling out by going home on a Friday without making that payment.
And I guess part of the problem is there is no real framework for how companies interact like this. I mean, as a freelance journalist, as a small business like yourself, you've put in invoices. I did, in fact, stop working for a very large American IT company back in the 1980s because it was 120 days for payment.
Absolutely.
And my bank
that's what we
told
mean.
me not to bother. It was inflation was taking the money out of it.
And that's what we actually mean by late payments in a huge proportion of the events that we're talking about. We mean extended payments. And I've actually seen 360 days. Now, when you say to somebody in a procurement department or a payment department, what would happen if you didn't pay your employees for a year? Well, what would happen if you didn't pay your employees for 4 months, 120 days? They would be talking to you about being in arrears with their mortgages, being evicted from their properties, that's tenants, their relationships breaking down, having sleepless nights. They're, possibly even thinking about homelessness and leading to mental health problems. And we've got to take this really, really seriously, because that's what we're doing to our sole traders, our freelance workers, our smallest of small micro businesses. And, it's not just one business that's affected, because each business, if not paid, affects the other businesses that they themselves are working with.
Very familiar problem. Let me go back to Robert here, because at the Federation, Robert, you've got a range of memberships here. Is there a kind of stratification by size in terms of, should a small business have a 30-day arrangement, and maybe a medium-sized business 60-day or 120 or whatever? Is there some sort of almost market practice type level of thing that should be in place here?
I think most of our members sort of just go for the standard sort of 30-day payment terms, really. And I think actually some of the smaller ones will be, who are a bit more possibly on top of invoices, in and out. They perhaps even go for 14 days. And from what my own experience, they are quite sort of on top of it. Certainly the better ones are anyway. You have to be if you're a micro business. As Liz was just saying, then you have to be all over this because £500 in one day can be the difference between make or break. But coming back to just touching on what Liz said as well about awareness. I mean, I think a lot of big businesses don't actually understand how big a problem this is, and how much it affects smaller firms. And I don't think the general public do either, actually. And I think actually, in the past, big examples have come to light on this. I think when members of the public have actually sort of understood what some businesses are doing to other businesses, particularly bigger to smaller ones. I think there's actually general disgust at the way this has been handled. Because as Liz said, if you didn't pay your staff every month, and it took them 4 months to pay, then they'd be outraged. It howls of outrage about this. So, and I think we need to make that a more something that people are more aware of. And then we should name and shame as well. I think that's something we should do. We should name and shame businesses that do this. And I know that does happen, but not as much as I think as I'd like to see. But we should also probably name and praise the businesses that do well and that are leading the way on this. And I think a bit of both of that would probably really work well.
I mean, personally, I put immediate on the terms of my invoices, but there's nothing that makes anybody pay any attention to that. There's no contract particularly. Is there some sort of if you go right down to the plumber level, when the plumber comes, you're going to pay him for fixing your tap or whatever. So there is a sort of implicit contract, and as more and more of them use electronic payments or card readers in their business, sole traders, which we saw during the pandemic as a growth. There's still no actual reason for the payer to fix any terms. They can say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we always pay 60 days, even if you can write what you want." Yeah,
and that's when it comes down to education, I suppose. But what you find is with the very smallest of business, your plumber, the trades type of thing. If they're doing that kind of work, Joe Public would pay them on the day. That's how it works. But when they're doing business for other firms, when they contract themselves out, that isn't. They're good at what they do. They're good at the plumbing, the tiling, and that kind of thing. But what they may be not very good at is the back office stuff. So they might not be aware they can negotiate the terms. And it's why we do actually educate our members with some of the workshops that we do and some of the education programs we put on for members and non-members. Is about teaching how to do. How to get paid quicker, how to sharpen up your payment practices, how to sharpen up your credit control. But again, businesses, if they have time out of the day to learn that kind of thing, it's time out of earning money for the smallest. So it's a hard balance for them. This is why it's such a problem.
Yeah, let me go back down to Anne actually, because I've got a question as a small business person, and when you've got established relationships with restaurants who need chefs, so do you have contracts with them? Do you have a standard terms of businesses that you do with all of them in terms of what?
Yes, we do. And unfortunately, to pick up as well on what Robert was saying, there are so many businesses who actually don't bother with it, but we do. And we used to be a bit lenient and accept to start trading before we got the paperwork back. Now it's not coming. It's not happening at all now. Right. We want to make sure we've got the paperwork back before we actually say, yeah, okay, we'll seek out and help. But we do. We have standard terms at 30 days. Now, it is always difficult because we do come across these clients who say, oh, no, we pay at 60 and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's really difficult to not have an argument with them. Exactly. You just want to have a conversation where you want to say to them, listen, it doesn't work for us. We can help you. But it's really difficult. And I'm not sure this is just a matter of education as to how, I can be trained to argue better for people to actually respect our terms, because there is really a bone of contention that, unfortunately, it's always going to be the big one who is going to win.
Yeah, and you, as you said before, the relationship issue is of paramount importance. We're talking again here in the context of banking and technology. Is there anything that your banking service provider can do to help chase invoice late payments? Are you seeing that kind of stuff being offered by banks? Would you like to?
It could be something that is very nice. However, I mean, we work in partnership with a factoring company, which is a competition to the banks. I do apologize. But the bank wasn't going to offer us any solutions when we needed to expand the business 6 years ago. So we turned to other providers. Now the banks are starting to do that. Actually, there are some banks who do factoring themselves. And when you do factoring, which is a little bit different from invoice discounting, you actually hand over your books and they do the chasing for you. So this is really nice because it saves an awful lot of time from your side. To do something else with. And it's something that probably more banks should be doing, even more so if we are more on the platforms and do everything a bit more remotely. And so you've got logs that are automatically saying to you, well, this invoice is due tomorrow. What do you want us to do with it? Or something a bit more automatic is probably would be a very good step forward with using technology. Absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to Liz now and talk about the wider context. And we've named some problems. You've seen them. What else is it? How is this fitting together in a broader view in terms of other issues that maybe further up the food chain? You're seeing a bigger picture. You've got a lot of issues to deal with.
Yeah, we do. But if I could just pick up on that point that you made, small businesses, sole traders, micro businesses, etc., are very unlikely to go for factoring or anything of that nature. And small businesses don't really like to borrow if they possibly can. And of course, there are costs all the way down the chain. Somebody's making money at each step along the way, which is taking money out of somebody's pocket. And I would suspect that ultimately ends at the bottom of the chain. And so I would like to avoid that if at all possible. Don't forget there are 1.2 million small businesses that don't have business bank accounts. And there are probably around about 2.8 million somewhere that are not digital. And so they can't use the digital tools that are available. So there's a huge picture and it's very, very variable here. And it's very difficult. You know, Rob talked about education. That is a really difficult issue too, because there's so little time for education. I want the top end to get it as right as they possibly can. So I would love to talk to the chairs, because I honestly don't think that when you've got big companies, the chairs of big companies always know what the payment processes and procurement processes are within their organizations. Now, if I can get to talk to the chair of an organization, the chair calls the CEO calls the CFO, and somebody between them brings in the chair of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee. And then you've got the four most important people there around the table. And also, if payment practices and payment practice reporting were to become accountable to external audit, which is a suggestion that is on the books, then the external auditors would also be taking that into account. So I think that, you know, there is a bigger picture. There's a part to be played all the way through, from the bigger guys right through. But I think it's the organizations in the middle that haven't spent the money and invested on their processes where a lot of the problems really sit, because actually it does take some of them 60 days, which sounds ludicrous in this day and age when the technology is so good. But try going to your finance department and say, I want hundreds of thousands of pounds to update the investment in my payment processes so we can pay quicker. And that's a very difficult argument to have. So we really need to get it to the boards and say, come on, what's happening there? We got to get this right and got to get it better and quicker.
Well, that raises a point that one of the audience has sent in a question. John Toon has sent in a question, and he's actually asking, is it fair to blame the large corporations where you can go to the board and the chairman and they have audit commissions? He says he sees SMEs with poor cash flows not paying because, you know, not paying the even smaller SMEs, that food chain problem again.
Absolutely, David. And this is where we get most of our complaints. It's about from small businesses, about other small businesses. But part of the problem with that is people think, well, hang on, if I hang on long enough, the big business will eventually pay me. What they're worried about is that the small business might be in the same boat that they're in and not getting paid, and they may go bust before they actually get the money through.
Yeah.
So they're more likely to come and talk to us about that. And that's a really difficult issue. But it is true. There are lots of SMEs with poor cash flow situations. They're not paying their own suppliers because they, as John says, they know the light touch. But actually, that's where the whole respect for the whole chain has to come in. Those other SMEs may be having struggles of their own getting paid too. Everybody's to blame and nobody's to blame. You see what I mean? But we all have a part to play in getting this put right.
But does everybody have a different code of conduct? Is there something you could do and government could perhaps do in getting, we have these in the investment bank environment, for instance, but why not in this world?
Well, we do have the prompt payment code, and we have got about 3,300 organizations already signed up to that prompt payment code. They're all sizes, they come from all sectors, and we are hoping to constantly push that message that signing up to the prompt payment code means you commit to paying your small suppliers within 30 days. Therefore, a small supplier knows that you're actually a good company to work with. It enhances your reputation, that commitment. It's an ethical thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Your investors want to know that you're paying on time. And I am talking big and small businesses. And the people coming out of universities who want to work with ethical organizations know that you are good to work for too. Because if you're not paying your suppliers on time, the possibility is that you're not really very good at looking after your employees either. And so that is a question that graduates with a lot of skills that we are really short of at the minute are beginning to ask.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground there. We're coming towards the end of this session. Let me go back to Robert first, and just to get any questions that. Now, Robert, you would probably agree with all that she was saying there. But Liz, we're talking about the breadth of people and the need for some codes of conduct. What do you see as the one pressing thing we could do to put this right? And particularly if you could point it at the banks and the technology people, so I can throw it at them in the next session to get an answer from them.
Well, just perhaps touching on on the prompt payment code. It is in theory it's a great thing what it does, but it's a little bit toothless. We probably could do with it being having a bit more teeth. And in the past, we've seen businesses who have been signed up to the prompt payment code, not paid promptly. And there's not a lot of sort of recourse for businesses that do that. We saw Tesco only earlier this summer actually withdrew from the prompt payment code. So how much sort of effect is it having? The big businesses really care. Anything that the banks can do to help businesses get paid, I think would be wholly welcome. We see, I think it's the latest stats we have is 1 in 3 businesses experience late payment. That's a staggering amount of businesses that are getting paid late, and we need something done about that.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Then we'll see if we can get some answers from the banks and technology. Let me turn to Anne as a final bit for this session. Anne, before we go, we talked to Co-op and the Bankify about what their solutions might be. What is the one thing that you, either from them or from Liz, you've got Liz going to go and talk to all these chairmen on behalf of small businesses. I'm sure you think that's a good idea. What would you like them to what one thing would you like to find as a solution, if you can think of? There's probably loads, but
do you know the one thing that probably could guarantee payments on time is direct debit? I know it's not going to be very business friendly for an awful lot of companies, but at the end of the day, who wants to be paid the gas, the electricity, the water, the whatever? They put you on direct debit. They don't accept any other means of payment. So why can't we have businesses adhering to direct debit clauses and guarantees? Why not?
That's a very good one, and actually that was one of the things I was going to be asking the next panelists. So thank you for priming that and saying it's important to you as well.
Very welcome.
So all right, with that, I'll thank the 3 panelists for this session. As we've discovered, it is a very huge problem. It's very widespread, and it is having societal repercussions. So into the second session, We're going to be talking to the Co-op Bank, very famously an ethical bank, and at the moment looking very closely at the small business section. So we've got Catherine Douglas, who's the MD of that for the Co-op, and we have Mark Hartley, who is experienced and very vocal supporter of small businesses through technology and banking. I've known Mark for a number of years. So you heard some of the things there, and I know we've talked in the past, Mark. You've got opinions on all of these things, and many other things beside. But we're not going to talk about football today. So, what did you? Let me turn to the bank first, because I'm respectful of banks in my profession. Catherine, what did you pick out of that? Did that sound familiar, or did you think we were already solving these problems?
No, I think it does sound familiar. I think we are aware of the issues. We are looking at ways in which we can help support and try and solve some of them, to be honest, David. So, I mean, to me, I think what is still concerning is some of the statistics that have been quoted as well, because they're still very startling. So I think, if we can work collectively, which I think, the previous sort of speakers have said the same, this is like everybody's problem to try and resolve. And I think if banks can play a part in that, then all the better, I think. Absolutely. And I know, at the cooperative bank, that's something we are very keen to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Mark, you're promoting solutions to help small businesses, or you actually promote solutions to give to banks to help their small business people. And did you have you were probably nodding in recognition at that last comment about direct debits, especially
terrible solutions.
I kind of agree with you there, but I know some people would be very happy at direct debits. We'll come back to get the Co-op point of view on that. We've got new things coming along, like request to pay, for instance. You might think that's a better solution. I'm pretty sure you do. There's a whole range of things like confirmation of payee and things that can go towards solving this problem. But nobody knows about them apart from those of us who sort of wander around in the back rooms of banks, do they? They're not telling the customers very much.
Well, I think, so kind of answering your first bit about things that resonated were a lot of things that were said by all the previous panelists, and one thing that always comes back is we as an industry have this acronym of SMEs, small to medium enterprises, and we treat them as if they're all exactly the same. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? So, as was talked about by Liz and Robert in particular, that a plumber and electrician has a very different problem than a small business like mine, whose customers are predominantly or exclusively financial institutions. They don't know about invoice financing. They don't know about discounting. They have really no idea that card payments and direct debits are actually a complete rip-off for them. And the built-in costs are absolutely not the right thing for them. And that's where things like request to pay services with variable recurring payments and standing orders take out the costs of all of those things that people just accept as the way that they should and need to get paid, because that's the way it's always been. And actually, there is a massive education program that needs to go on, an awareness program. And I think that financial institutions, a lot of banks, actually don't understand their customers particularly well. So I think Liz quoted that there are 1.2 million businesses in this country that don't have business current accounts. We actually think nearer to 3 million, and actually they use their personal current account to trade. And of course, financial institutions don't offer business banking tools or things to help them get paid if you're running your business with a personal current account, because you're not supposed to under the bank's terms and conditions. So I think there's a whole raft of things in this problem, just to pick up on late payments. Those card machines that everybody might started of using in the pandemic, when your electrician turns up with their SumUp or their Clover or their iZettle card machine, they kind of hang on to your money for a 5 to 10 day period under the banner of risk and chargeback. So I could easily mount an argument that they're part of the problem, right? Because they're holding on to your money for, if you're a service provider, why are they you're not providing a product that might not turn up or might not be, fit for purpose. If you're a plumber that's provided some services there and then, why are those people going to hang on to my money if I can collect it there and then, which you can now do through request to pay services using QR codes, for example.
Which we've seen in many other parts of the world, particularly in the Far East. Yeah.
And we can do that here too. It's it's something that the UK can do with open banking, etc., etc.
Let's go back to Catherine and get the perspective from the bank there. Now, there are a couple of things in there. Direct debits. We've been banks and institutions have been persuading people for years to use them, but there are inefficiencies in there. I know people who still use standing orders and checks. In fact, I was told by someone the other day that I was being paid late because their check run doesn't happen until the end of the month, which I thought was rather quaint. That's a different subject. Within the co-op, how do you stratify your consumer customers who are using their personal accounts, the small businesses who might be using an app type account, and similar to the challenger bank type online only things, and the proper corporate banks? Do you have a sort of layered approach?
Do we have a what? Sorry, David, you just
a sort of tiered approach.
Yes, I mean, at the cooperative bank, I think what we're trying to do is, acknowledge, as Mark said, that business sizes are very different, and so therefore business needs are very different as well. And I think what we're trying to do is give a range of options to customers rather than trying to sort of dictate what customers may well want to do or not do. I think we have got a big appreciation, as we've heard already today from the panelists, that a lot of small businesses haven't got time for cumbersome sort of administration tasks. So we're trying to sort of provide better, improved services to help reduce the time that they need to spend, because they are trying to run the business at the same time. So I think the request to pay solution that you and Mark have been talking around, I think is a great solution to be able to do that, and that's why we're really pleased to be able to work with Mark and Bankify to bring that holistic payment solution to the market, really. And I think that's for all SME customers as well. So we haven't just restricted this to cooperative bank customers. So I think as a bank we are just mindful, and we will need to be mindful, that customers do want different things, and I suppose we're just trying to respond to some of those customer needs, but then really start to move towards more of those technology solutions, because they are quicker, they're simpler, and they're more efficient and effective, and that's what we're trying to help business owners to do, and obviously really to help their cash flow.
There's a question coming from one of the audience which actually reflects on something I was thinking of asking you, which is about the role of the bank as a service provider, helping the customer with understanding banking and understanding finance to some extent. The SME owners don't necessarily have the strong finance background and the risk committees that Liz was talking about. Does the automation help you maybe spread some of that capability to sort of give advisory almost with an AI capacity or over video links or whatever? Are you thinking of using that?
Yeah, absolutely we are. And when we do use sort of video conversations now as well, as well as still going out to customers to meet them sort of face to face. So I think there is a great opportunity for us in the future. And I think we do a lot of work with Federation of Small Business. Obviously you've heard Rob describe some of the things that they do as well, and I think that's that whole education piece as well. So we do try to work with other external organisations, just really to inform customers as much as we can do around topics that they're interested and they want to know about. And we do run sort of regular webinars as well, because that's very important to us. And I think we've talked about it being everybody's responsibility to try and solve this, and it absolutely is, to try and get our customers and SMEs knowledge better for them, so that they do feel that they're better equipped to manage their business and to solve this late payment issue.
Yeah, and presumably you do offer things like invoice financing and those things, but to customers where that's appropriate.
Absolutely, to customers where it's appropriate as well. And we wouldn't try to, force anything on a customer at all. The customer will advise us of what we want, what they want to do. So yeah, you're absolutely right, David.
And this is one of the aspects that we sort of came up in the beginning of the last session, in that there's this chain reaction effect up and down the chain. With payments being late, that causes cash flow problems for someone else. There are ways to get around that. You can have a conversation, you can just ignore the debt, or you can look for other means of finance. So we're seeing a big explosion in loans. Obviously, we've got the bounce back loans and so forth. This is a particular situation which is going to cause people other cash flow problems in the next few months as well. So this is all adding to a big problem. How do you view that?
I think, we're working very closely with, with industry and our competitors as well to, try and make this seamless, I think, for customers. We've obviously got the pay-as-you-grow options following on from the bounce back loan, because, we are trying to support small businesses as well as we can, really. But I think, these more technical solutions and digital solutions are really going to help that. But we will need SMEs to use them and adopt them. And that, again, is another challenge for us.
It's an interesting thing. I wonder to what extent a bank can introduce a solution by itself. There has to be a framework of some sort. We've got India has the massive framework there. Australia and New Zealand, someone's commented about rolling out their e-invoice over their payment networks with fixed terms and fixed conditions. We've got a mass of different schemes and so forth, credit cards, debit cards, we all know what they are. There's nothing cohesive about that. Will technology take us down there? Maybe that's one for Mark, because I know you've got views on various schemes around the world. Mark, where do you see that homogenizing towards?
Well, the problem is there's no homogenizing, and if you look at the different payment schemes, the different payment rails, and then you look at the different way that the accounting package vendors work and the ERP system vendors work, and then you've got standards like PEPOL, and the Scandinavian countries have been very good at promoting invoicing solutions, but that only kind of partially solves the problem. It's not getting the invoice in the customer's hand that stops them paying, right? So I actually think if you look at the necessity to join up the process, one of the fundamental things that banks perhaps have not been brilliant at doing is they look at products, they look in silos, so current accounts, loans, checking accounts, savings accounts, whatever you want to call them. We small businesses think in terms of workflow and process. So, when I send an invoice out, that's had something to do with my accounting package. I want someone to pay me as a consequence of that. I then need to do my matching and reconciliation back into my accounting package. And as one of, I think, the questions that we may get onto from the audience has been asking that, a lot of small business owners aren't financially savvy. They've relied on people. They don't have admin departments and finance departments. By definition, they're sole traders or micro businesses. So they have up until now had to understand what it is that they need to do to get money from their customers. Plus the fact, as I think it was Anne was saying on the previous panel, there's that thorny question where you don't necessarily want to have the relationship strained with your customers, despite the fact that they may not be paying you on time. So I think what banks' response needs to be is actually not a half-baked response like some of the so-called digital players that understand small businesses in this country have done. So, with a Starring or a Tide, for example, you can send the invoice out through your banking app, but they don't help you collect the payment. So the invoice getting out there is not the problem. It's making sure the person that receives it on the other end actually pays you. So this is where technology can come in. So you can link your bank account, you can create your invoice, and the press of a button, you can deliver that invoice to your customer and push it into your accounting package. So you can run your business from your bank's portal. You can also send that request to the customer. You can remind them through technology when they haven't paid you. If you're face-to-face with them, you can collect the money there and then. And once the payment hits your account, it automatically matches and reconciles in the background against your accounting package. So I think the issue here is perhaps banks don't think like their customers and they don't understand the problems that their customers have got. And actually working in partnership with organisations that are small businesses. The reason we do this is my father-in-law is a painter and decorator. I've got friends who are osteopaths. I've got friends who are electricians. They don't get finance, but they know that they need money for their business to flourish and survive. So if you can automate that and at the same time chase the late payment for them without ruining the relationship with their customer, and at the same time reduce the admin burden by not having them to do the books and the paying accounting through it, you can actually solve lots of problems with technology. and not through an expensive relationship manager, because we know that that simply won't work for the cohort of micro businesses and sole traders.
Let me go back to Catherine, because Catherine, I've got to put that to you, that banks don't understand their business customers. Do you think?
I didn't say Catherine, did
I didn't say Catherine, but banks definitely. And as I said right at the beginning, it's not just small businesses that have that problem with banks. So do you think there's any truth in that banks are, to some extent, because of that distance between the banking function and the company finance function, which are slightly different and coming out from different ends? Do you think that gulf is part of the problem?
I think it probably can be. I think there is an element to it. I think, all I can say, I can speak on behalf of the cooperative bank, that we're doing everything we can to understand our customers better and find solutions, as Mark's described, that really help them to run their business. And I think, there's a lot of activity out in the business banking SME space across banks at the moment as well. So I think they are a lot more focused on it than perhaps we have been historically. And I think it's definitely sort of a growing area of banking, because we do want to start getting things right.
Mark was taking to task some of the challenger type offerings, but I mean, from an incumbent bank yourself, you've been around a good long time as a bank. Do you see that as being a spur to improving services in a competitive sort of way, or is it really the technology that's enabling that, and you'd be using it anyway?
No, I think it's probably both. I think it is that spur that we're seeing, and also, embracing that new technology is really going to help both us as a bank and our customers as well. So I'd probably say it's a mixture of the two, to be honest.
But does the technology then, I mean, gradually, as new technologies come along, they tend to even out? You get some great new service that comes out, and two or three people have a CD player, and then everybody's got one, and now everybody's on MP3. But over time, the same services are being offered by everybody. So the big high street bank names and your other competitors will eventually have a very sort of similar. Is it a race to the bottom? Is there something you can do to add value to your customers?
I think, we just need to keep listening to our customers and talking to our customers and staying, close to, companies such as Campfire and working with some of the fintechs to really understand how we need to, keep ahead of the game, really, and what it is that customers need. So I don't think it's a case of it's a one and done. This is just a continuous process and continuous way of working that we need to adopt, to be honest.
Okay, well, let me see if Mark thinks that, because he's been you've been involved in a number of innovations over the last, in the decade or so that I've known you. Do you see that kind of, someone does an innovation and everybody copies it, and then we move on to the next thing?
Yeah, and you know what? The interesting thing here is that I think the traditional banks actually face exactly the same challenges the so-called digital neobanks. So the Starlings and the Monzos and the Tides and are facing the same problems that Catherine and HSBC and others are, and it's not from other banks, it's from people like Shopify, PayPal, Square, Stripe, QuickBooks, etc. Because they have worked out that people like me need a much more holistic offering, and with the changes in regulation and the advances in technology, notably consensual sharing of data, and access to people's data in their bank accounts. The danger for the bank is that they're reduced to being the pipe of data into somebody else's rich customer experience that solves all of the problems in one place. And actually, on the subject of that, open banking, I think the banks have had a bit of an unlucky run on this. Why is it that the regulators think that the data that my business holds in my bank is mine, and therefore the bank is forced to share it, but the data that I hold in Xero is Xero's, and they can charge me for access and sharing it? So I actually think, the banks have, whilst they've not been necessarily the fastest to adopt new technologies and work with customers and necessarily understand them, I think the danger for banks, and as I said before, not just neobanks and traditional banks, all of them, is actually other parties that can now do payments and banking and other stuff under this banner of embedded finance. They're the real threat, not the likes of Starlink.
Yeah, so that's interesting. But one of the audience has commented that some of the technologies we've been talking about have been around for years, but they're not really being embraced by the small businesses. I wonder what your response to that is.
I think it's awareness and education. I think the other thing is there's a big demographic challenge there, David. So I think if you speak to, well, my father-in-law, who's now 70 odd and as a decorator, painter and decorator, doesn't have a mobile phone. I agree with that. But if you talk to a 22-year-old creative who's set up their own business, they don't need any education about how to use technology. So I think that's a really easy thing to say is, it's always been there. Why aren't people using it? Well, there's loads of examples of people using it, but that's not saying that, the awareness, particularly of problems like this, can also, as in the late payments problem, can drive people to understand that there are actually really good solutions out there that not just solve the late payments problem, but actually help them reduce the costs of running their business and paying accountants and delivering loads of paper-based invoices and receipts, that you can actually automate a whole load of this and actually get your time back at the weekend as a self-employed person or at night and run it all from a single place without having to go from one experience to another. And that, as I say, what people like PayPal, Stripe and others and QuickBooks have worked out. So it's a war with other providers to the same customer. That's where the war is, not between the banks.
Yeah, but there's also the point that some of the things we're talking about, it's in a general technology sense, like request to pay or some of the other schemes, e-invoicing or any of those things, are of really no interest to small business people. They're not much interest to me, and I write about this professionally. Some of them, they're just embedded. Nobody now. We've had how long is it now for faster payments in the UK? 18 years, more than 18 years. The last 18 months I've put my chronometer out. But younger people, my daughter's 20, she's never known anything but faster payments. She doesn't think that banks ever work. I don't think she has a checkbook. There's that sort of thing. So that's that generational shift. All of these things will be just part of the product set at some stage.
Yeah, but it's the workflow thing, David. It's not there's lots of bits to this puzzle. It's not just give the customer the ability to do an invoice from their banking or portal. You've got to join the dots up to actually, as you say, remove the necessity for these organizations or these people to understand finance. They know that to get paid, they need to issue an invoice. They know that to submit their tax return, they've got to have their bookkeeping done. They know that they've got to now do making tax digital online if they are VAT registered. So put all of these things together, give it them from one place and take the complexity out of it. It's not as hard as people think. They've just been told that they need to pay a qualified person to do it for them, and they don't. They can do a lot of this stuff themselves.
Okay, so back to Catherine. Catherine, you obviously you live and breathe in the small business sector. This conversation is going to be going on for some time. There's lots more to discuss, isn't there?
Yes, there is. No, definitely a lot more to discuss, and I think it's good to be part of the discussion. I think. As I said, we really want to stay focused on what the issues are for customers and then look at ways in which we can provide solutions to help support them. Okay, well, on that point, I think we're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm very conscious of the tops of the hour in my trade. I'd like to thank Mark and Catherine for that. The tip of the iceberg of the problem, as was the first one. This is going to be, I'm going to look forward to writing about this later on. I'm particularly going to look forward to it because there's been some tremendous suggestions coming in from the audience. I'm going to call out my final thing, Kevin Telford, who says we should actually have a discount on tax and HM up for faster payments, and HMRC should offer incentives. I think that's a splendid idea. So I'm going to leave everybody with that thought, and I'm going to hand back to Helen, who's going to say the final words before the top of the hour. Thank you very much, everybody.
David, thank you. Wow, that conversation could have gone on a lot longer, and I'm glad to hear from everybody that it is the beginning of a whole series of conversations. And Kevin, let me just add, that's a cool idea, and I imagine that everybody in our audience who have been firing questions at the panel would agree too. So first of all, thank you to everybody for their engagement. What we will be doing is sharing this on social. So please do share this conversation with your friends, with your colleagues, and your business partners. That would be absolutely fabulous. So all that remains for me to do is just to wrap this up, as David said. First of all, I'd like to thank our speakers. You have been honest, and you have very, very generously shared your insight and expertise. It is a conversation that I personally have found fascinating. Would love to hear more from our audience after the conversation, and to do that, they can engage with us on social. We will be sharing the stats that I shared at the top of the call, plus a lot more from the co-op, from Bankify, from Liz, the Small Business Commissioner, just to keep this conversation informed. We will also, it's too good an opportunity really, with David and Liz both being ex-journalists, not to get them to contribute to the blog. So we will be doing that. So that all that, really, before I say goodbye, I would like just to thank Team OBE for helping work with the co-op and Bankify to put on this campfire. So thank you to everybody, and I look forward to talking more again very, very soon. Thank you. And David, we promised we'd finish on the top of the hour, and we have done. Good afternoon, everybody.